Catus Maximus here. This is just a quick video talking about this Porter cable 6605 cement fiberboard shears. There's not really a ton to talk about. No, I don't have any cement fiberboard immediately available to demonstrate these on. I tried finding some scraps and I couldn't. Anyway, I did buy this used. I had a DeWalt a long time ago. I think I did a video at the beginning of my channel, but ended up having to sell it. So I was finally able to pick up this Porter cable unit used at one of my favorite junk stores. This time it was only 12 bucks. These things tend to be outrageously expensive. I think this Porter cable lists for like $159. That's because this whole front piece here is patented. So all these companies have to pay some huge amount, 50, 60 bucks just to get this piece here, which is indeed the patented shears. So these are very similar to power sheet metal shears that people who do sheet metal work, sheet metal roofs, sheet metal buildings, that type of stuff. But instead, the jaws have a big gap, and you can actually see how big the gap is there. So these would never cut any thin material. Cement fiberboard is really a very brittle material with fiberglass in it. So as these operate, all they do is just pinch and just kind of push the fiberboard up and just kind of shear it, and it kind of crumbles away. These things are love-hate for a lot of people who use them because they are very low dust. They're the lowest dust method to cutting cementitious fiberboard materials, which is used in siding as well as in baths and showers, or anywhere where there's going to be a lot of moisture, because of course it's impermeable to water and is of course fire resistant. The problem with these is the way they crunch, they just don't leave a very good edge. So a lot of people are still using diamond-tipped, polycrystalline diamond-tipped circular saw blades, as well as jigsaw blades, just because you can get a lot smoother and sharper edges on the cuts. So like on siding, if you're going to have something over the edge, then these work fine. But a lot of people I've talked to say, I still use circular saws because they provide a much straighter cut. The interesting thing about the way these are designed is the middle part kind of pushes up the fiber, and it kind of folds over this jaw and then gets pushed against these jaws. So you can actually see the rounding, that's the wear, really gets concentrated on these outer jaws, where the inner jaw has almost no wear on it whatsoever. And that's kind of the trick to this design. You wonder why there's this extra hole, and that's because since the wear is focused on these outer jaws, they're designed for you to remove a couple Allen screws and simply flip them around. Then you have this new sharper edge down on this side. Otherwise, these tools are just a head attached to a drill motor. In this case, a 20-foot, it's advertised as 2,500 oscillations a minute, but that's just the RPM of the spindle. So this would be a 2,500 RPM 6.8 amp 3/8 drill that they simply pull off the chuck and then just put on an eccentric cam that has a bearing that just sits in the back of this jaw and just goes around and makes this jaw wobble back and forth. Porter cable product, this is a pretty new one. I don't know if this is made in China or where. It doesn't actually have a country of origin on the sticker on the bottom, which is really pretty unfortunate. They do have a pretty decent belt hook, which I do like, on the side. Switchable to the other side. Just as proof it's a drill motor, you have a reverse and a forward, but since it's a cement fiberboard shears, there's no reason for it to ever switch directions, so this trigger switch has no reverse lever on it. But otherwise, this is just a normal DeWalt product. So anyway, I'm just going to pop open the gearbox and the back handle just to show a quick look inside, and call it that. So in the back of the tool, there's just about nothing, hardly any wires, since there isn't any reverse wires, just a variable speed trigger, some basic brushes. Not super fond of this design because it's even worse than what would be known as clock spring brushes that many other even Porter cable and DeWalt tools use. But since this is based on a real basic tool, they use basic brushes. The reason I like the clock spring ones is because linear brushes sideways, they don't, obviously you can see, they're not very long, and then there has to be space for the spring in there. So these brushes are probably only that long. So you do have to replace the brushes more often. We can look at the commutator. It's not too bad, not too much wear. Definitely some, but it's going pretty evenly, so not a lot to talk about back there. And something that I am going to complain about more in the videos is, like, these are the screws that are holding on the gearbox. The short little screws, and just like that Milwaukee drill, manufacturers just using such short screws that they just have hardly any traction inside the small amount of plastic that they're engaging in. You know, a screw like this is only engaging maybe, I mean, it's like less than half inch of plastic. And they always are getting loose, and then gears misalign and tools wear out. So it's almost like a designed obsolescence thing. Really pretty annoying and frustrating. Even though they seem to want to try. Come on now. Like in the case of this tool, where there is indeed a seal in there to try to keep the everything together. Or excuse me, to keep the crud out and try to keep some of the grease in there. These little cards right here that you see on some tools, it's because of it has a helical cut first stage on the gears, and since they're sideways, they kind of act as screw threads. And so in this case, I assume the motor would be spinning this direction. And so what that does is can cause grease that gets caught in there to be pulled back towards the motor and ends up getting in the bearing and that type of thing. So that's literally called a grease slinger. That's what they're called in the parts manuals. And so any grease that gets kind of pushed back hits that, literally it's just a piece of cardboard pressed over the end of the motor, hits that and then and spins it out. We can, well, it's hard to see, but there is indeed a little needle bearing right there. If we pop this out, that's also a needle bearing, a little thrust bearing or thrust washer. Milwaukee tends to use like a ball bearing on the side to take the thrust and then the needle bearing on the other end. So this is just a little bit simpler, but there is a needle bearing on that side. And it is straight cut gears on the secondary stage because they're slower and you don't have to worry about them making quite as much noise. Anyway, that was my little video about these Porter Cable cement fiberboard shears. Certainly still run pretty smooth even after all this time. I think it's interesting. This definitely was hanging off somebody's tool belt for a long time. Hours. You can just see the flat that's been worn right there. Doesn't exist on that side, so wow. Anyway, that, and just to make the point that no matter who you buy, whether it's Porter Cable, DeWalt, Makita, doesn't matter. They're all going to have the same patented head. So all you're buying is basically a 3/8 drill with some company's patented head on it, and then you're getting charged a huge amount of money. I mean, these things will run from $150 to $200 depending on the manufacturer. And even though they're low dust and pretty convenient, it's just the nature of the beast, they don't leave very nice cuts. And so it's kind of, you get one of these, but you still are going to end up wanting to have either carbide jigsaw blades or one of those polycrystalline diamond circular saw blades when you're working with the cementitious fiberboard. And you're just going to have to deal with the dust because they need to come up with a design of these that makes better cuts instead of just kind of pulling it. And that's the problem, is it just pulls and folds over the fiberboard, and so it just leaves a crunchy edge that just isn't very good. And it's just the nature of the tool, but they are handy to have if you're doing like indoor work, like outfitting a bathroom with fiberboard backing in the shower area. You are going to want these because otherwise it'll just be a cloud of silicate dust if you use a circular blade. Anyway, really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.